So welcome to the .NET user group. We're gonna hear from Ben Michaelis on .NET testing.
Oh, I did not add your slide at the
Oh,
front.
you're good. Wait, go back.
It'll be at the very end.
At the very end. Okay, well then we'll do the announcement at the very end. And that's fine. So we'll just get started with doing .NET testing with Microsoft.Testing.Platform. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Dan. Unit tests. Yes, we have unit tests chanting out in the crowd. This is how we want to start this talk. So thank you guys all for joining here in person and any people who are online. We are going to be diving today into the new Microsoft testing platform. This has come out since about 2019. They've been kind of working on this new idea of how do we reimagine unit testing, integration testing, all kinds of testing in the .NET ecosystem. So just as a refresher, let's move back. Let's remind us what we are living in today, which is oftentimes VSTest. So VSTest has been around since 2012. It was a whole integration that was created so that testing could be implemented into Visual Studio. You could get that nice test explorer on the side. It is tightly integrated, beautiful UI there. But there's some problems with it. First of all, it requires multiple processes just to run your tests. When you type in .NET Test on the terminal and you hit enter, what actually starts to spin up under the surface, excuse me, is it starts to spin up a process called the VSTest console. It then launches a test host process, optionally maybe like the data collector executable to process your code coverage, all these kinds of things. And there's a lot of coordination overhead that is happening for just a single test to be able to run. This is why sometimes your test startup might feel slow. You go .NET Test and it's sitting there and you're like, okay, let's get this started. I'm just trying to check if 1 + 1 + 1 = 2. And things can go just weird and awry and wrong. The next thing is it requires a specific test framework adapter package. This is one of those things that you probably haven't realized because once again, these are just things that we're used to at this point. But if you install XUnit, you have to install XUnit or NUnit, and then you need to install the corresponding adapter package. That's your package that's called xunit.runner.visual studio. It's basically the glue between the test framework and the runner, like VSTest console, so those things can properly communicate. So if you're like, why aren't my tests being discovered? What's going on here? You probably forgot to add that adapter package. Another common problem people have. They're like, I installed XUnit. Why aren't my tests running? We forgot an adapter package. Another thing of VSTest. Lastly, it also requires, it's reflection based. And so every time you say .NET Test, it goes and uses reflection, looks across all your test projects for all your tests, and it scans all the assemblies at runtime. And this means that also depending on what's happening on your specific machine, if you're running on Windows or Linux or whatever, there's technically minor nuanced differences of what happens on machine to machine, because this is all happening at runtime. It's now meaning the .NET runtime's taking hold. It's now meaning these executables are taking hold. This isn't deterministic. This is now something that is determined at runtime. It also means that depending on how your NuGet cache is set up, you could actually be getting technically different versions of the VSTest console. You have different versions of Visual Studio involved, those kinds of things. Another point I haven't even covered there is it needs to be a specific type of project. You can't just go .NET Run on your test project. You have to have, in the top of your, we'll go through this, but in the top of your project, you have to say, this is a Microsoft test project. It's not your normal Microsoft just in your normal Microsoft project. There's something special and unique, which once again can create all kinds of pain because you can't do things with test projects like you can other projects. Lastly, it doesn't work with AOT. So AOT, I don't know if you guys have ahead of time compilation. You guys maybe have played with it, maybe you haven't played with it. But it's basically moving all the compilation to the native code to compile time instead of happening at runtime with JIT and similar. It's moving it all to compile time, and because this is all runtime based, you can't actually use AOT with your test projects with VSTest. That's just functionally incompatible. It just doesn't work. It's a big architectural difference. AOT strips away all the reflection metadata that VSTest depends on, and so nothing could even operate. So that's VSTest, nothing new. This is the world we've been living in. we're like, these aren't even pain points because we've just worked around them for so long. But Microsoft looked at those and said, there's something that can be better. There must be something better. And what they have come up with is the Microsoft.Testing.Platform. In this new paradigm, your test project is the test runner. That's it. There's no VSTest, there's no test host, there's not these other executables that get called. MTP is embedded directly into your test project. So you can run it like any other executable, any other console app that you might write, you can execute it the exact same way, no external tooling required. That is pretty sweet alone. Secondly, because VSTest required its own host process and these other executables to execute, that also means your standard .NET diagnostic tools that you used didn't always really work or attach cleanly. If you ever wanted to do like .NET Trace and go find your way through a problem using .NET Test, that's not really possible because it's not a normal executable. You can't just hook up your executable and run it. With MTP, your test project is now a normal executable project. Literally has a .exe extension. So if a tool works on the console app, guess what? It works on your tests. You can now do .NET Trace, .NET Dump, you can do profilers, you can use debuggers. All those things just work, which is awesome. You also get compile time extension registration. There's no reflection, there's no dynamic loading. At compile time, your test frameworks, your code coverage, all those kinds of things get registered up at build time, not at runtime, and not just by like scanning the folder through reflection at runtime. And so this means that, hey, my adapter that's running my tests picked up the wrong thing from NuGet caches, depending on my CI runners running an older version than my local runner. That all goes away because everything becomes deterministic. It also now has 0 dependencies. Instead of having like 4 lines of dependencies of you have your test framework, and then you have to have your adapter, and then you have to have the Microsoft.Net.Testing.SDK package installed, and all these other things, it's one assembly, the Microsoft Testing Platform DLL. That's it, nothing else. It's also now more deterministic. Because there's no runtime discovery or dynamic loading, this means the binary just behaves the same everywhere. You can literally, like, if you have a failure on your CI runner, you can now grab your bin directory, you can grab your bin directory, the DLLs and executable there, place it on your computer, and just execute. Once again, this is a normal thing now. This isn't something that was runtime discovered. The behavior is going to be a little different because of the runtime dependencies there. It is what it is. It's just a .NET executable. And as I mentioned, it also supports all .NET form factors, including AOT. We haven't kind of dived into the advantage of this, but while VSTest physically cannot support these new features coming out, like ahead of time compilation, MTP was designed from the start so it can support these new kinds of things. Without this is kind of the high level. We're going at this from the 10,000 feet view of VSTest and why is MTP solving some of these problems? How is it solving it? Any questions to start off there? We'll dive into what this actually looks like here in a minute, but great. I'm skipping over this one because I already mentioned it with .NET Trace, .NET Diagnostic. All those things can now work with your .NET tests. So why should you care? First of all, the thing that we all kind of care about secretly, we love our little optimizations where we can get them, especially if they're for free. First of all, is performance. They've seen sometimes up to 30% improvement from just fewer processes. You're not passing through multiple executables and having to hook up all these processes. And there's no serialization overhead up front. All this happens at compile time. Secondly, as I mentioned, it's deterministic now. The same thing's happening in the CI as it's happening locally. Third thing is it's portable. Because you can grab your bin from the CI run and run it on it locally, that also means you can do things like you can take your test project and you can shove it into a Docker container, and now you can run all your tests on a Docker container immediately. You don't need to have the .NET runtime all hooked up. You could just file it, shove it in there, go. It's also future-proof because you have AOT. You get all the tooling of the .NET ecosystem, any future tooling that might come from the .NET ecosystem, because it's no longer this special little butterfly needing the .NET Test SDK. It's now just a normal executable. Something that I think is really powerful, and I think this is one of my favorite parts of MTP, is that it's extensible. So you can opt into NuGet packages for things like retry, coverage, crash dumps, open telemetry even, hot reloading. All these things are now extensions that you can get with the new Microsoft testing platform that you couldn't get before. Well, I'll show off some of these, but I think they make even some features, like if you've used live unit testing in Visual Studio, where it'll sit there and watch your changes and then rerun your tests for you, it can somewhat do that for you now natively, just built into the SDK. And lastly, it's secure, or second to lastly, it's secure because, once again, it has 0 dependencies. And this is one that I don't think is talked about much, is it has a little bit better strict defaults and explicit behavior, in my opinion. So an example of this is a common thing I would do in the VSTest land, and I go write my run settings file, and I say, hey, if you discover 0 tests, that's a failure. You should classify it as such. Because by default, in VSTest, if you go .NET testing, you have no tests that are discovered, it goes, great, everything looks happy, you're good to go. And I'm like, I wrote a bug, my tests are no longer discoverable, I want to know that something went wrong. In MTP, you don't even have to configure that. If it discovers 0 tests, it's going to count that as a failure, and you can configure that if you want to, but the defaults are a bit stricter by default. And I personally appreciate when you fall into the pitted success of, oh no, I discovered 0 tests. That didn't mean that everything's happy. That means I had a regression and functionally all my tests were deleted, for lack of a better term. Now I'm going to talk quickly about when do we still want to use VSTest. These are, I think, quickly going to disappear. First of all is WinUI and UWP test projects. Once again, I think the number of people and percent of people who are using these and building these kinds of projects is very limited. The support is coming. It's just not totally there yet. Second is you can hook up like your JavaScript and your C++ tests with VSTest. Once again, not totally supported yet. It's coming. Third, because MTP is very new, things that just utilize third-party integrations, a common one is maybe like your coverlet collector for your code coverage. There's automated things that can do in there to like take your .NET code coverage and immediately import it to this other format or do these things kind of in this one-shot experience. It can't do that yet. So while it can give you the coverlet format output, it's not going to hook in all the things to get you all the way to this other format in the one shot. You'd kind of have to stick on a couple extensions to make that happen at this point. So not as good reliance or backwards compatibility yet with some of these existing ecosystem providers. Third is you're on an existing project that uses VSTest. I say that, I'm going to be very clear about that. That doesn't mean that because you're on VSTest, you can't go to MTP, but it is not supported to have like your repo and to be like half on VSTest and half on MTP. It's either one or the other. You can manipulate it up the line, but it's not really that well supported. The best thing is to kind of just switch, either on VSTest or I'm on MTP. The switchover itself, I don't think is too painful, but it does involve the .NET CLI command line commands that you run for .NET Test. The arguments and things like that aren't the same, so it's not like a drop-in replacement where you go change my packages and now I'm in this new experience. There's a little bit more to it, so it's not a drop-in replacement. Yeah. The other reason is that you're running older than .NET 10. So .NET 8 definitely doesn't support MTP. .NET 9 supports what's called MTP v1. It's kind of like poor man's MTP, I'd say. They're basically trying to like shim in MTP into this .NET ecosystem. It's weird. It's quirky. It's not a great experience. Now with .NET 10, it's like a first-party provider. It's fully supported. It works wonderfully. Yeah. So older than .NET 10, you can make it work in .NET 9. I would just wait until you're on .NET 10. But .NET 8 is about to disappear here in a couple months anyway, so you might as well hop there anyways. They started building it in 2019. Yes, they started building in 2019. This is when at least when I was reading through some articles and stuff, they started like imagining, and they're like, hey, this seems to be a problem because we're starting to foresee AOT, these other things. They saw the problem. They said, let's start thinking about fixing it. MTP v1, I think, really started becoming supported in like .NET 9. 2024 kind of era. So it's really only really come to fruition in the past 2-3 years. Good question. Any other questions? Great. Let's dive in some code. We don't need any more slideshows. Okay. So first thing we're going to kind of go through is I just want to show what the current experience of VSTest looks like. We're going to do just some compare and contrast. So this is your, I wrote a .NET new XUnit project, spun one up. I'm using .NET 9 in this case, and there's some things that you'll notice. First of all, excuse me, I'm on the old one, but I'm using the Microsoft.NET Test SDK. I've had to install that package. Second of all, I've had to install the XUnit package. Third of all, I've had to now install my XUnit Runner Visual Studio package. What this does, once again, is it basically is the interop between XUnit and the VSTest console to say, hey, you want to do this thing, how do I actually execute that? Then I have to have a separate cover data collector package using cover collector, which is technically a third-party thing, and I'm managing all these things. It's not packable. You're not able to run .NET Trace against it, none of those things. Also, if we run this, let me expand this out. You don't even think about it anymore. Where I found a lot of impact with this was when I was teaching a class at EWU, we'd say, hey, go spin up a new test project. And people would go spin up a new XUnit project and they import XUnit and they're like, why isn't this working? And they're just like banging their heads against the table like, I don't understand why this doesn't work. What they forgot was they forgot the adapter package, the xunit.runner.visual studio. And so they're saying, they're like, I did all the things, XUnit's there, it builds, why isn't .NET Test working? And I was like, okay, I've now found, like, I'm used to this now, but it clearly is not intuitive unless you've done this repetitively like we have before. So if we run .NET Test, you've seen this a million times. This will be clear why I'm showing this soon. This is what the output currently looks like. So it shows that it succeeded. It has a little summary. And then if we try to run .NET Test, as we know, you can't run .NET Test directly against your VSTest projects. Now, let's move into the MTP world. We're going to show off MTP v1. So this is what existed about 2 years ago. This is what existed with .NET 9. And I generated this using the .NET new MS-Test -test runner. I'm using the MS-Test test runner in this case. Ignore the little tilde here in the corner. That's just because the markdown common syntax gets a little weird otherwise. So in here, first thing you'll notice is I have to do some of this backwards compatibility stuff. Once again, we're in this weird between world. We got VSTest, very well established, MTP, not fully supported .NET. What happens in this time is .NET Test, basically we have to figure out how to shove MTP to run into the VSTest console. How do we get MTP to work with VSTest? So there's all these backwards compatible shims, I'm going to call them, that Microsoft basically implemented. First of all, you have to enable the MS-Test runner. You have to enable the testing.NET.Platform test support. You have to be able to show console errors. You have to enable showing test failures. Bunch of things. Excuse me. Yeah, there's a lot of fun nuances with this. But when we get down to our package references, you'll start to see where the new stuff starts to shine. So we no longer have that adapter package. In this case, we're using MS-Test, but you'd have your adapter package, your runner package that translates between the two. Now all we reference is MS-Test. We still reference the SDK, but we have these two new packages that we get, which are the extensions packages. So now before, where we had to reference the coverlet collector in order to get our code coverage, this is now first-party support by Microsoft. They now provide a code coverage package natively that you can use. I think that's pretty cool. So if I go run, we are now 01. Oops. Y is in tab. Oh, wrong directory. /. There we go. I'll come back to that. Okay. Let's get into the fun stuff though. So, with the new Microsoft.NET SDK, MTP, one thing that I thought was really cool, this is something I'm actually currently working on with some clients, is we have some specific Docker containers that we have to run everything in. We use custom Docker containers in our CI. So our Kubernetes, there's basically a Kubernetes cluster that runs Docker containers that runs all the CI runners that we use at the client. This means that it's actually really nice to be able to just like shove the test straight into those Docker containers and make sure they're compatible, because they don't have a lot of the infrastructure that we would have with some of the native images. These are like very locked down images. And so one thing that we started playing around with, just as a proof of concept, is being able to actually run the test straight on the Docker container. Just a cool thing to try. So let's try that. So all we've had to do, this is a cool feature that came out in .NET 9, I want to say. Kevin can probably remember off the top of his head. Kevin can't remember off the top of his head either. So there's this fancy new thing where in your CS test project, you can now say my project is publishable, and I can enable SDK container support. These two lines here. By doing these two lines, I don't have to write a Docker image. I don't have to do any of that stuff. It will go build me a Docker image for me when I go and build this project. You can actually use this in a lot fancier scenarios, like, hey, I want to actually go build I want to Dockerize my .NET application and deploy it into a container. You can use the same thing and you never have to then write a Docker image. So let's go to our demos. /demos 02. So all we've added is enabled test runner. We've removed the XUnit test runner. Now let's run .NET run. One thing you'll notice, I just ran a test project using .NET run. I don't know if the significance of that hits. Because I can now run our test project with .NET run, I am now the normal first-party person in the .NET ecosystem. I'm no longer this weird outlier because I'm a test project and I can't run diagnostics or .NET trace against me. I can now incorporate into those existing toolings that exist. Second thing you'll notice is the output looks slightly different. The summary looks a little different. They basically redid the entire .NET Test CLI and the .NET Run CLI to support MTP, where it actually displays separately. And as you're running your tests, it can also show you output as your tests are running of like little summaries of, hey, this is how far along we are, this is what we're doing, all those kind of things. So let's build our executable. So our .NET Test project built. And here, all I did is I went and grabbed the executable that's in my bin file, and I could directly run the executable now. That's so crazy. Austin. %. So this is at compile time. I'm compiling a DLL. I'm compiling an executable. And at that point in time, I just ran it. So if I made some changes and I didn't go rebuild, I'm still running my executable. It's just like any console application. Once again, we're now in a very native support land, as you would any other experience. Another thing that's cool is the extensions that we have. So in this case, we have the code coverage extension and the TRX extension. Is that because those come up at compile time, those now can stick their documentation into the help menu. So if you go .NET Test -- help, those extension help menus will now be shoved into the .NET Test help menu alongside everything else. So to show this, I just ran .NET Test -- help, and there's a lot here. you'll get all the normal options you would get with a .NET Test application. Hey, you can debug it, diagnostics, these are all familiar options. But when we get down to the bottom, there's this little section now that says extension options. And so all the extensions that I've now added in to say, hey, now you can go do code coverage, you can now also export TRX files. All these options are now shown up on the .NET Test command line as options that I can actually execute right there. Any questions about that? So if I add a new extension, let's say the retry extension, and I say .NET Test -- help, those options for what can I do with that new extension, the abilities it provides, are now added into my .NET Test command help command line, right there. Now, if you remember, we did actually enable the SDK container support. What this went and did is built me a .NET container. All I have to do that is run .NET publish. So when I run .NET publish /t container, what it goes and does is actually goes and builds a, oh, fantastic. Let's make sure it's actually Docker's running. Docker will come back up. What it will go and do is it will actually go and build a Docker container for me. In this case, it's building the O2 Docker tag. And then I can actually go execute the tests that are now built into that Docker container. See if my Docker container works with, yep. So it was unable to find the image because I didn't have it. So if we just go up and we take the .NET publish command, so we've done a build. I'm now going to publish cd samples. I'm going to publish a container. Building out the image. There we go. So now we have an image called O2 Docker. I could literally go Docker run O2 Docker, and I have now run my tests inside a Docker container. That is definitely not something that you could easily do with VSTest, because you needed, once again, you needed your VSTest console executable, your data collector ones, everything else. This was just done. So I just ran my tests on my Windows machine in a Linux container running .NET 9 in a Linux Docker container. Any questions about that? Very simple. 2 lines of code. I turn on the support. I now get Docker containers that I can publish using the .NET CLI. I can now execute my .NET tests inside that Docker container. So we were on MTP v1 is what we were just discussing. We had all that support with MTP v1, and once again, it was kind of shimmed into the .NET CLI. It basically had some interops between what it wanted to be and the existing .NET Test CLI to be able to still execute using the VSTest existing infrastructure. Now, with .NET 10, what came out is called MTP v2. They did deprecate a couple things, but for the most part, is now it is a native first-party provider in the .NET ecosystem. This means I no longer have to run these properties like the testing platform, .NET Test Support, show test failures, capture output. There's all these things to be able to enable interoperability between the MTP land and the VSTest land, because it just works now. Now there's some caveats now. How do I get something to be MTP? First of all, in your global.json, first of all, I'm using .NET 10. Second of all, to opt into this behavior, you have to specify your test runner as a Microsoft.Testing.Platform test runner. This basically indicates underlying, hey, we're not on the VSTest side. We don't want to execute with VSTest. I want to execute with Microsoft.Testing.Platform instead. Second of all, as we showed before, it compiles to an actual executable. This is special because we are currently in the MS test land. The third thing you'll notice is this is all I need. So all I need to get some basic testing is the MS test package or the XUnit package or the NUnit package. One package, that's it. Now, how I said, there's no dependencies on the Microsoft testing platform. That's just brought in transitively through your whatever testing provider you're going to choose. So MS Test, NUnit, XUnit, they all support MTP, including the new kid on the block, which is TUnit. I don't know if you've heard of TUnit. It's a fun new kid on the block in the testing world. And that package is brought in transitively, so you no longer have to worry about it. Now, if I want to add functionality, once again, code coverage, TRX reporting, those kinds of things, all I have to do is add those packages in, and I now have support for that because it's a very minimal surface by itself. Just get .NET Test support. You don't get support for code coverage. You don't get support with TRX coverage. None of those things. Not really anything new because you needed coverlet collector before. Once again, all you have to do is add in these Microsoft code coverage packages, TRX report packages, in order to get that behavior. So if we go back and run our third one, I am in O2, but I would have thought that I was happy to. I guess it wasn't. Should probably make that PowerShell script a little better. So extensions, they're easily added just by adding in these packages. And now when I run, I can now run and get a TRX report. So a TRX file was just generated. You'll notice some CLI differences. It looks a little bit different than we were experiencing before with VSTest, where, oh goodness, I should not be try to find this, but we can go run it again in a minute. Here we go. So if you notice, this was how the summary looked before. We had all this output of discovering, finish, starting, etc., and the summary looked like that. So they've redesigned the CLI in these little simple ways. And now I can run coverage and reporting for my TRX all in one go. And it's all done. Questions so far? Now I want to show off maybe one of my favorite parts of all this. So if I go there is, and if you have a bunch of tests, if you have a bunch of tests, which I don't have a project that has a bunch of tests, but it'll actually show a simplified output. So instead of showing the details for all your tests as you're going and like really crowding up your console, it'll basically just have one line that says like, so far as we've progressed, you have like this many passed, this many failed, this many haven't run yet. And it'll just kind of show this one line simple output as you go along, which is really nice. So if I cd into the directory, this one, and we go into, let's go into the 3. And let's do something, yeah. It's the one that I, make sure I select the right package. That's the wrong one. Here we go. MTP v2. Okay, so what I want to do is I wanted to add some extra abilities into my testing platform. So what I can go do is, this is the Microsoft Docs, where they show all the different extension packages they natively have in as a first party. One of these is called Hot Reload. I think it's pretty slick. So, oops, clicked on the wrong thing. Hot Reload. So with Hot Reload, I can now, where's the had a package registration here somewhere. Here it is. I can now grab this package. And I can go drop it into my project file. And now, if I go run .NET watch run, and I go change something in my calculator, what you'll notice is automatically on the fly, my tests are automatically, it's watching for file changes in my tests or actually in my projects, and it's actually rerunning my tests on the fly. Pretty cool support. Before, you could basically, at least from what I know, one of the best ways to get this kind of behavior was live unit testing in Visual Studio, of which you need the enterprise license for, so you had to have the most expensive version. Now I can basically say, hey, go install, use MTP, add the hot reload extension. Now you can get live unit testing. As I'm just coding along here, I can be making changes, and it's just going to be going and testing my changes and making sure that everything's happy and dandy as I'm going along. One of the cool extensions, I think. Questions so far? Before I keep going. Okay. Let's dive in to XUnit. Is XUnit a very, I use XUnit a lot. Is that common for all you guys to be using? What's your favorite testing provider lately, other than Kevin, who uses TUnit exclusively now? Yeah. Kevin in the past couple of days has vibe coded his own testing testing library. All it is it's actually a secret CLI command that just passes it to Copilot and says, go check that my code's actually all good. So if XUnit is the most common, I want to go some little things with XUnit because the first time I experienced this, I was very confused. So you have XUnit. XUnit came out with something called V3. This is their basically the new XUnit. That's what we're going to call it. And there's 4 packages. Yes, there's 4 packages that are now shipped with XUnit V3. There's XUnit V3, XUnit V3 MTP V1, XUnit V3 MTP V2, XUnit V3 MTP off. I think those are the 4 packages that are shipped. Not confusing in the slightest. So I was like, I want to try this new Microsoft.Testing.Platform thing. And then I chose XUnit V3, naively, expecting it would just give me the latest and greatest things. That actually defaults to MTP V1, and I was like, I'm so confused, nothing's working, the documentation doesn't line up, what is happening? Just be aware, you're migrating to this and you're using XUnit, there are 4 packages. So XUnit V3 currently refers to XUnit V3 MTP V1, which is the only thing that you want is if you're on .NET 9, and so you're kind of in that little in between era. We kind of don't care about it today, because if you're on .NET 10, you're going to want MTP V2. In that case, you're going to want to choose the XUnit V3 MTP V2 runner. So literally be, I think it's dash MTP on, something like that, in order to turn on the V2 runner. And then, if you're like, I want the newness that comes with V3, which is a couple additional attributes and testing syntax, but I still want to be on VSTest, there's a 4th package for that called XUnit MTP off for that case. Off, OFF. Yes, it's not confusing in the slightest. I actually think I pulled it up somewhere. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So V3, MTP-V1, MTP V2, and MTP off. So, but MTP V3 is currently the same as MTP. No, yeah, V3 is currently the same as MTP V1. I've looked at this immensely and I'm still very confused. So that is kind of high-level Microsoft testing platform. So benefits we get. We now get executables. I can literally go and grab from the bin file after I compile it, cd into, let's say, 04, up a directory. I can now go .NET build. It'll give me my DLL. I could literally just copy this. I could change to an exe, and I can now run my tests. Oh yeah, I forgot that we were hot reloading and we broke our tests. So, any questions, high level, MTP? Other than that, you should go and use it. Okay, something I want to talk about a little bit is T-unit. Who has heard of T-unit? Heard of it 5 minutes ago. So NUnit, XUnit, and MS-Test have been around since like 2007, 2006. They've been around for a long time. So they were on VSTest. Now they're coming out with support for MTP. T-unit is kind of the new kid on the block. It started being built a couple of years ago by this dude named Tom, and it is built exclusively for MTP, and it does not support VSTest. That means it gets all the cool things and can do all the breaking changes that the other testing providers can't or don't want to do. What this means is you get a lot of, first of all, you get a lot of cool syntax. You get like fluent assertions. I don't think I have it shown right in here. Oh, yeah, I do. You get some fluent assertions built in. You don't have to have a third-party provider. It's just built into the test SDK. There's lots of extensions built on, like I want to go do Playwright. Well, they have a native Playwright integration for T-unit that you can just add in that package, and it's a first-party provider that manage all the parallel instances for you, all those kinds of things. It also is ridiculously fast. So I'll just show you the benchmarks here. So this is all with MTP. So we're comparing apples to apples. We got T-unit up top, which its mean speed is 537 milliseconds compared to a very slow and lazy XUnit apparently at 780 milliseconds. I mean, come on. But where the real magic happens is AOT. So AOT, once again, ahead of time compilation. I'm basically going from my .NET code to native code at compile time. So instead of going to an intermediate language that then I move on to my machine, and I use a runtime to use JIT and those kinds of things to then execute my code, I instead am compiling all the way to native code and I'm executing. What this means is you take a hit up front with your compile time, a little bit slower because you're going all the way to the end. You're doing all the things that the .NET runtime would do at runtime, and you're doing that ahead of time. But this means if you have a testing library that is going to execute a significant part of your code base, that AOT takes, once again, a relatively small hit up front for very large gains at runtime, because it doesn't have to actually use the .NET runtime, and it also doesn't have to do things like the .NET runtime does, like JIT, the just-in-time compilation, where it moves things around in line. It's all done ahead of time. That's where you see some real performance boosts. And here, in this one case where we're testing async testing, we move from even just T-unit, which uses the latest and greatest things, at 537 milliseconds, all the way down to 122 milliseconds. We are now going like ridiculously fast. Some other things that it has built into it, excuse me, is it has a bunch of like mocking libraries built in. It also allows for maximum parallelization, where you can basically have like all your tests execute as quickly as possible. So while VSTest, it basically says, hey, let's only execute one per test project, I think. One per test project at a time, and then iterate synchronously through those. T-unit goes, how many cores do you have? How many processes can we run? Let's maximize the throughput and get our testing done as fast as possible. It also has native mocking providers and things like that. So it has been, I've just started to dive onto it because a lot of the projects I work on haven't gotten to use T-unit yet. So I've started to play with it outside of work a little bit. I've been really impressed with the support. Updates are coming literally daily. And because they literally worked very closely with the Microsoft team as they were building MTP, a lot of the feedback that came into MTP in the past 2 years came from T-Unit as it was developing on top of this new ecosystem that Microsoft was building. So I've actually started moving a lot of my tests from XUnit and similar to T-Unit to get all the niceness of all the fluent assertions, the playwright libraries that just super easy built in. I don't have to think about my infrastructure of, hey, how many Chrome instances am I running, and am I going to overload when I'm running in parallel? I just don't have to think about any of that stuff. So that's my little thing for T-Unit. Since Kevin's a big fan, I don't know if, Kevin, you have anything you want to add on for T-Unit, as you've probably played around with it more than I have. But
I mean, you hit the high points that I love the most. Is the performance is there, and it's worth noting the performance is there if the testing bottleneck is actually noticeable, right? Like
totally.
I did it on a project where there was a whole bunch of UI testing and the benefits were negligible because the overhead was starting up the UI and hitting that. And so the performance implications of what the testing harness was adding to it were so minor, it was hard to see. But the syntax improvements have been great.
So
No,
you go. I was just going to say, he's just asking, is there anything from XUnit that T-Unit hasn't built out already ahead of time? I personally haven't found anything. I've built only a couple projects off of it, and I've ported 3 major projects that have 1,000+ tests to T-Unit now, and I haven't run into any kind of backwards compatible. Well, obviously the syntax is different and you port over, but once I get over, I haven't found anything that I haven't been able to do in T-Unit that I was able to do in XUnit.
No, the only thing that used to be there is the T-Unit used to have what I would describe as a worse interface for extensibility, just because of the way they've set up their assertions and otherwise, whereas XUnit, it was often really easy. You derive from the XUnit subclass, you do your modifications, you're off to the races. T-Unit has since fixed that. It is worth noting T-Unit is not afraid of making breaking changes, so when you see a major version rev, do not be shocked if they have made substantial API breaking changes, because that is somewhat intentional, as they're trying to be on the latest cusp of everything. And so if something's painful, they will fix it, and they will take a breaking change. Whereas XUnit, I think, because they have such a large user base, it's really difficult for them to ingest major breaking API changes because they would have so many people screaming. Whereas T-Unit, the user base is still small enough that the author's kind of getting away with it at the moment, because, like, I mean, still semantic versioning, so you know when it's coming, but at some point, yeah, there are breaking changes that come. Whereas XUnit really abhors breaking backwards compatibility. Yeah, so the question is, do you think that the changes will slow down over time as stuff comes in? Possibly. The one thing I will say is the T-Unit author, if you go and look at the docs for like migrating from XUnit, he oftentimes will write Roslyn syntax fixers specifically to go through and migrate from old syntax to the other. Because as a library author, you often know exactly what changes somebody needs to make to migrate from old to new. And so oftentimes there will be breaking change code fixers put into the library, so that in theory you can leverage Roslyn or otherwise to go through and apply it, or turn your AI loose on it, because like this docs page here, it eats it for breakfast and goes, oh, okay, here's the pattern. I change A for B, and it goes through it. Because you'll note even down below, there are code fixers, yeah,
like
in place to go through and make those changes for you, because they are somewhat straightforward, even if they are not simple regex changes. They're a little more complicated than that, but it can do it intelligently.
He'll basically give you your little squiggly underline and say, you should now use this, and you go control period, change across my entire solution, and it just ported it over. So when I migrated, it was about 1,200 tests, and some were playwright tests and all that kind of thing. It took me, I don't know what, probably like 3 hours. And I'm not encouraging you to go, hey, let's take our entire XUnit thing and like make it T-Unit today. But it is worth going and playing with something that is now natively built on top of MTP and not just migrating to MTP, because it has some advantages that it can do that the other testing providers can't do, just because it's not 20 years old and doesn't have to worry about this backwards compatibility stuff. That once I started playing around with it, I was like, oh, this is what this could look like in the future. One example that I stumbled on this the other day is for Essential C#. We have the website that, as I'm working on it, I found this option that it was injecting in these HTML reports for my tests in my CI run. So I went, my CI run just failed, and I opened it up, and in this case, this one didn't fail. And I saw this little report at the bottom, and I was like, what is this? I went and clicked on it. Let's hope that it actually works now. And it gave me this like nice view of the test run that happened. It said, hey, this is what it ran on. Here's all the conditions, the PR. And it even told me like, here's the 10 slowest tests. Here's the execution timeline. And I could start to trace all these things in like a simple visual view. And I was like, that cost me nothing to get that. That's kind of cool. And it's built into the testing provider. I can start to filter my failed tests, past tests, and analyze them. And so it actually made me go look at like, I've never thought to even look at my 10 slowest tests usually. Like I kind of don't care for the most part. And I went, well, that one's really slow. That took a second compared to everything else. Well, I should maybe go like, at least send an agent to go try to figure out what's going on there and can I speed it up. So I've found little quality of life things like this that I've really enjoyed with T-Unit. In addition to all the little things of like having fluent assertions built in, I love that. The fact that everything is basically async all the way, so you don't have to kind of think twice about, oh no, I made my test a void test and I switched the internals to something that's async and I forgot, like, I just don't have to think about any of that kind of thing. There's a lot of extension points, and then there's a lot of things of like mocks built in, logging built in, that kind of just work. So maybe that's my 2 cents. Not necessarily advocating go build XUnit, switch over from XUnit to Unit today, but I think it's definitely something worth considering if you're building a new project and you don't need that 20 years of experience and you're like, I'm willing to live a little more on the bleeding edge. First of all, if you're building a new project, you should just go use MTP v2. It's becoming the new thing. It's going to be the new standard, and you get things that you don't get otherwise out of the box. So that's like a guarantee. No matter which testing provider you're on, MS Test, NUnit, XUnit, you should use the MTP stuff with v2. That's kind of a guarantee if you're starting a new project. There's no reason really that you should use VSTest unless you want some of that really heavy support with some third-party providers. Otherwise, just go use that stuff on the test you're on. Otherwise, I think it's not a thing right now, and I don't think backwards compatibility is ever going to disappear because 20 years of infrastructure on VSTest is not going to go away. But it's something to definitely consider of like, I'm not going to get these benefits going forward without being on MTP v2. One thing alone the other day I was able to do that I've never been able to do is run a profiler on my tests and actually go profile them and be like, where's the really slow points on these tests, and can I actually like benchmark and compare these tests, and even throw a Copilot agent at it and say, go profile my tests and figure out how we can speed things up. Give me a dump of my tests, those kinds of things. Being just an executable gives you a lot more in the .NET ecosystem than we got before. So, other questions about T-Unit? I'll give one other plug to MS Test. MS Test is, I've used it for like class and stuff. When I'm teaching a C# class, I'll sometimes bring an MS Test because it feels like the most Microsoft of them. It has it in the name. I'm like, this probably is the most supported scenario I could possibly be down. But for anything that I'm doing personally, I've kind of abandoned it. And I don't show it super well in any of these, but you need now all these packages, these extension packages, which is not something new compared to VSTest. You get your coverlet. These are just now first party provided. But you have to manage all these packages and the version numbers, and that's kind of a pain. So with MS Test v4, I'm going to kind of just hand wave over the syntax a little bit, but you basically have a different test SDK. I don't think it's .mtp. Something akin to that. So you change your SDK, and that basically abstracts one level up. You now have the Microsoft Test SDK, not the Microsoft .NET SDK. What that gives you, though, is some cool little abilities, like instead of having to have all these packages, there's some attributes built in. I'm pretty sure I pulled these up. I was closed. There we go. MSTest.SDK. There's some fantastic little attributes that come along with that MSTest.NET configuration, here we go, where instead of me actually need to add in all the extensions myself, I can basically use the property testing extensions profile inside my project. And there's 3 configurations: none, default, and all Microsoft, which will then enable all these extensions. And by doing that, you basically no longer have to worry about the underlying packages. It just comes in with your revs of your .NET, of your MS Test package itself. So that's a nicety where as those packages are iterating, I don't have to update each package or think about it or go add the 10 lines of extensions. Those are just brought in via the one line of the testing extensions profile. I can now say all Microsoft, and I have now gotten all the Microsoft extensions injected in at build time. So it's another little nicety. I get to remove a lot of lines out of my project file. I don't have to worry about more NuGet dependencies or anything like that. Other questions about MDP? I'm kind of leaving this a little bit more open-ended than I kind of normally do because I'm curious about your guys' scenario and how any questions you might have around that. Yes. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it just works. Yeah, I think this is all you need. This is me. Yes, this is me because I'm manipulating us from a Microsoft.NET SDK, and I just hand coded it on the fly. Because before we had a yes. Because before I had a Microsoft.NET SDK, I didn't get it by default, so that's why I had this imported. So this is an artifact of me doing this on the fly. So at a minimum, I could do this. I could go all Microsoft. Live demos always work, right? .NET build. Oh, fantastic. I don't know what I've changed. Live demos don't always work. Okay. What are the questions that we have? I'll quickly mention the extensions because I think they're very useful to go through. So code coverage, that's expected. It supports all the default code coverage outputs that you'd expect. Crash dump, this is because the things, oh, this is significant. Because the .NET Test CLI is now different, so the commands that you got with VSTest no longer work with .NET Test. So while on, let's say VSTest 01 first, .NET Test, and we type in help, I could do something like if I wanted to get my blame hang, I would just pass that to the .NET Test CLI, and I'd do 10, and it would just work if I'm actually targeting test project. On the new one, .NET Test dash just help, you'll notice that these command line options are not the same. Wow, I've really messed this up with. Let's just undo this. There we go. .NET build. Yeah. What did we break? Oh, looks happy. Let's try .NET clean. There we go. That's all it takes. When it doesn't work the first time, just clean it up and try again. Okay, so .NET Test help. And now you'll notice that our, oh, I didn't add the crash collector, but for example, the crash dump extension, I copied that into my test project. We build, which registers up that process. And then now when I run my test, let's have some warnings. See if this, oh, I know what's happening. The .NET watch from the hot reload. Okay. When I run .NET test help, now it should cooperate. We now see that the command line argument is slightly different. It's now crash dump instead of what we had, which was the blame hang. We also still have, so a lot of things are just done now through extensions instead of built into the VSTest runner itself. This does mean like your CI pipelines and stuff. This took me quite a while because I basically did a drop-in replacement. I was like, why is nothing executing in my CI runner? I didn't realize the CLI basically gets swapped when you move to MTP v2. So you basically have to then go figure out the new commands for all your extensions in that new land. There's some really cool things though, like the retry one. I stumbled on this a couple days ago when I was looking at this. This amount allows for automatic retries of your failed tests up to a number of times. But then they thought of the case of like, well, let's just say something's like totally wrong with my test configuration and they're just gonna, like, I don't want to hammer the test infrastructure 5 times when it's not gonna work. They have low overrides like retried failed test max percentage, where it says like if over 20% of your tests are failing in your test suite, don't try to retry because something is clearly catastrophically wrong. Let's just stop there. And I was like, that's really clever. Like I do actually want, when I have some weird tests that involve like UI tests and playwright and those kind of things where I do actually want to retry at the test runner level, not within a test. I'd love just to be able to rerun the test. And I also, if Chrome isn't installed, I don't want it to just keep hammering on that process trying to execute. I want it to just be done. So there's some really cool things there as well. They can just iterate over. This is not a prescriptive thing. I would not advocate that you just go try those kinds of things. And then I've clearly closed the other page. Testing platform features. There we go. There's some other cool ones like open telemetry. I know Kevin was asking this about this a little bit earlier today. But where you can actually add your open telemetry provider onto your application builder itself, where you can get callbacks and get meters and telemetry about your testing infrastructure, which is kind of cool. You also have fakes built in. So if you want to do stubs and some basic kind of stubbing and mocking and that kind of thing, you can do that with the Microsoft's fake library. The telemetry one, excuse me, this kind of plays hand in hand with the open telemetry one, once again, about just collecting that data out so you can actually view it. Hot reload we went over. Crash and hang dumps on a lot of my projects to get that backwards compatibility. Code coverage, test reporting. This one is to get your TRX files. So if you, I don't know, theoretically want to get a TRX file so you can get a VS playlist to load up your failed tests back into your Visual Studio, you might want to use this kind of extension. So I expect these extension lists is going to explode in the near future, not maybe Microsoft's, but by third parties as they start to implement all the things. But I have yet to run into an extension or a case where I want to do something in MTP v2 that Microsoft hasn't supported some workaround in order to execute. There's also this one. So if you host your code on GitHub, but you execute your runners on Azure DevOps, there's also an extension in order to pull those failures from the DevOps runner and put them in line as little comments on your GitHub diff view as well. So there's little extensions for like that as well, which I think I've seen on VSTest before, but I can't remember. It's something seems to spark in the back of my mind. So, any other questions? MTP v2. Kevin, you're thinking. Any other questions from anyone else? That's my understanding. I don't know totally. I have not. I have not tried this one. Oh, there we go. Visual Studio Enterprise installation. Requires a Visual Studio Enterprise installation. I'm surprised it needs a Visual Studio. Well, as Kevin says, he hears that it might be coming in cheaper tiers, but who knows? A lot of that infrastructure is starting to slowly be implemented within .NET natively, though. Like I think of the latest one being the datetime provider. Now .NET has their own datetime provider that you can actually test, and you can actually stub out and set. So you can throw .NET datetime provider testing. Haven't used this in a minute. The time provider class, yes. So they now have a time provider class that is abstracted out, and you can actually go set, basically for your testing implementations, you can now go set the times with the fake time provider. So now you can actually go your times, and you don't have to go do weirdness with your own, trying to swap out the internals with datetime or do something there. Exactly. That's all. They haven't done anything fancy. That is all that they did. Just to be clear, they just slapped the word Microsoft in front of it, and now it's the best way, and it's not an interface. Yep. So, well, if you haven't played around with fake time provider, this is a fun new benefit. And the first time I used it, I was a little confused. I was like, oh, I thought I could just like, yeah, it takes a little bit of playing to get used to it, but what? Okay, well, now that we've gone off topic, any other questions? Last minute things, MTP v2, any reason not to shift? Going once, going twice? Yeah, I have nothing else, but I know Dan had some announcements, so I'll let Dan come up and give those announcements.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, I just wanted to announce next month, so it's gonna be a little different. We're gonna do a roundtable style. So if people are online, we'll also have questions, but it's gonna be the 4 kind of leaders of the user group. We're gonna be talking about our developer workflow. So we're gonna start with what kind of tools are we using, what tools are we not using, and how are we using them, and some of the tips and tricks, and just it's gonna be a conversation. So we want to hear from you guys as well, because as we all know, it's kind of crazy what tools are out there, what's best. There's a new thing each week, and the other things are dead in a week. So we're going to be talking about developer workflows in 2026. So it's going to be a little bit longer. So we'll plan for 90 minutes. And we'll have food. But yeah, that's going to be next month, May 5th, 5 p.m. Hope to have you guys come in and join in that discussion. So that's going to be it. And thank you, Ben. Awesome talk. And that'll be it. Have a good night, you guys.
So all questions.